So I don't know if y'all have ever noticed this, but it is one of the odd characteristics. Most of the stories we read about Easter morning, all the different Gospels, that almost without fail, the disciples do not recognize the risen Lord. Mary at the tomb, we read or it has been recounted, Mary at the tomb actually mistakes the risen Lord as a gardener, asks where they put the body. Next week, I think Lisa will be talking a story about Jesus observing the disciples fishing on the shore, and it's very clear they did not recognize him. And then this week's story, the story of the encounter of these two disciples with the resurrected Jesus on the road to Emmaus, is just another example of not seeing the resurrection, the risen Lord. And why is that? It's a puzzle. Now, I would posit to you it's not just simply a theological puzzle or an eccentric detail of the biblical stories. Why it's so hard to recognize the risen Lord. It speaks directly, I think, to the very human struggle the disciples have, the very human struggle that we have to actually see resurrection in the world, in the midst, particularly, of a broken world. I don't know about you, but I have found myself these days really struggling to see resurrection. Amidst what I would call mean-spirited treatment of immigrants and refugees, amidst the politicalization of everything from science to sexuality to education to the very safety net of the poor. It's hard to see the risen Lord. Where is, I think, a good question to ask, where is the resurrected Lord amidst these troubling times? It's a spiritual struggle for those disciples on the road to Emmaus that Easter evening, talking with each other about what happened. And it's very clear they are sad. They are grieving, they are angry, they are fearful as they walk to Emmaus. And then they meet this stranger on the road who asks them, what are they talking about? And then we're told in this strange line that their eyes were kept from recognizing him. I always wondered, well, did God intend to blind them about this, or was this their own spiritual blindness? What was keeping them from seeing the risen Lord? And there are times, I think it feels like our eyes are kept from seeing God or Christ in the world around us. Maybe it's our own blindness, maybe it's our own sense of unexpectedness about that reality. But I wonder myself, in what ways are our eyes kept from recognizing Jesus around us? Unbelief? Not enough belief? Or is just too seemingly impossible? And what does this story have to tell us about how our own eyes can be opened to recognize the risen Lord in our own walks to Emmaus? Peter Block, one of my favorite authors, once just wrote this very short sentence, which has become more and more profound for me over the years. He said, community is conversation. Community is conversation, its most basic form. And what struck me in this story, as this disciples are walking on the road to Emmaus, is they are having a deep conversation. It is in these conversations that a community engages that we have honest and forthright conversations, sharing our ideas, our struggles, our thoughts, our vulnerabilities, our hopes, and our fears. Those two disciples are having a profound conversation where they share those inner experiences, their own uncertainty about what is happening in the world. Jesus is gone. How do I make sense of that? They are talking to each other as they walk along. And then they have this willingness to engage a stranger, to open up who they were and what they have seen and heard as those disciples. They engage this total stranger, and if they had not had this conversation with this total stranger, they would not have experienced the reality of resurrection. And it occurs to me these days, you know what? We shy away from real hard conversations these days. I mean, we live in a social media-shaped world. We have posts, we have likes, we have dislikes, we have diatribes, yelling in caps, trying to communicate or trying to convince others, rooted in our own sadness and fear. How often do we really have deep conversations? Having a capacity to listen, to truly listen, and to hear each other. To me, part of the journey on that road to Emmaus is seeing the risen Lord is a call to a community who has conversation about vulnerabilities, about their own sadness, about their own grief, really honoring each other. Because that conversation on the road to Emmaus was not one that would be easy in any way. There is a sharing of their experiences, ideas that happen. They have to be willing to trust this stranger who they don't know. How do they know he's not a Roman Empire spy? How do they know this wasn't someone who helped nail him to the cross? But somehow in that moment they have this deep conversation about what happened. They're thinking about what has happened. And it is in that conversation that something profound happens. And in many ways, if you pay attention to that conversation, they actually experience someone, a stranger, who actually challenges how they understand what happened. Who actually lifts up some ideas that they probably hadn't even considered. Things they had not thought about in their own experience. Seeing the risen Lord, I think, requires of us an openness in conversation to be challenged. How we think about God, how we understand the world. Seeing the risen Lord risks our own willingness to be challenged. Now, there's this really, I don't know if you noticed this interesting subtle detail in this story. That as they come to their village, near their village, what happens? Where the village that they've been traveling to, Jesus walks ahead, it says, as if he were going on. Where is he going? And it isn't until the disciples, these two disciples, stop and invite Jesus, stay with us, share a meal. I think there's something very important about that invitation, something essential about seeing the risen Lord. I don't think they would have really realized that Jesus walked with them until they invited that stranger into their home, into their lives. I don't think they would have seen resurrection until they made that commitment to invite that stranger to be in community with them. In this act of invitation, in this sharing of a meal, we are told their eyes are opened and they see the risen Lord. So the question we're all wrestling with is, how do we see the risen Lord in a troubling world? How are our eyes opened to see resurrection? The first thing, the first spiritual practice, I will tell you, take a walk. Be willing to get on the road to encounter friends and strangers. There is actually a spiritual practice that is taught. It's called a prayer walk, where you just simply walk through your neighborhoods, watch and listen to your neighbors, maybe have brief encounters with your neighbors in your neighborhood. You might pray for the people in your neighborhood, but you are willing to engage and encounter them, and you never know, they might be the risen Lord. How do you see resurrection in a troubling world? Take a walk, have conversations with friends, with strangers. Be willing to be vulnerable and honest about your own feelings of fear and dread and sadness. Share your life. Be willing to listen, and even having a willingness to understand the world differently because of that encounter. How do you see resurrection in a troubling world? Invite people into your lives. Friends and strangers, break bread with someone. In this way, our eyes might be open. So I tell the story, I don't know if I've told it again. God help you, I've been here long enough that I'm repeating stories over and over again. But so if you've heard this one before, pretend like you haven't. So I was in seminary, and in seminary, part of your training as a minister is you do what's called clinical pastoral education, which means you go work at a hospital. Generally means you go work at a hospital as a kind of student chaplain, where you visit people in their hospital rooms and have conversations with them. Some you might have prayers with. And I was assigned to a hospital in Austin, Texas. And I was assigned to the lung wing, where people who had lung diseases and challenges with, what is that called, Dennis? Oh, thank you. Say that again, doctor? Pulmonology, that's right. So I couldn't even pronounce it, but I was assigned to it. This was the latter part of the 80s. And for many of you younger people may not know, this was, in the latter part of the 80s, a time in which AIDS was really growing in our communities. It was in what we understand now today so differently. Back then, there was a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety around catching AIDS or getting AIDS, and there was a lot of really kinds of angry things said around it. In part because AIDS had really been rooted in the gay community, which led to some people really blaming that community, as well as a lack of response politically as well as medically. But one of the consequences of having HIV/AIDS, often what happens is they have pneumonia. So again, latter part of the 80s, I'm working the pulmonology floor, and I knew I'd probably encounter someone who had AIDS. They, at that time, now we understand it really takes, at the time you had to wear gown, mask, gloves, everything when you went into the hospital room for fear of catching AIDS. Now we know that's not how it's passed. But one of the persons I met when I went to visit him on the pulmonology wing was a gay man who was dying of AIDS. And as I got to meet him and know him, he was a teacher at a local school, was someone somewhat cut off. I had no connection to a church because there was no church welcoming of gay men, particularly in Austin, Texas. And also was in some ways disconnected to his family. And I'll be honest, I had not really spent much time thinking about or reflecting on it. Wasn't that I had antipathy towards the LGBTQ community. It just wasn't something that was on my radar. It just wasn't something that I thought much about. But in that conversation with this young man, cut off from community, dying, unable to connect, in this conversation in which he shared his story and who he was, and challenged some of my own assumptions, I can't help but tell you that it changed me because I saw the risen Lord. Hallelujah, the Lord is risen. Hallelujah. One more time. Hallelujah, the Lord is risen. Amen.